Hello, everybody. My name is Kelly Wittich, and I'm the Director of Health and Wellbeing at Wespath. And today I have a very special guest with me. I'm here with Reverend Dr. Ron Bell of the Upper Room, that's with Discipleship Ministries. And Ron and I are here to talk about emotional well-being and clergy emotional well-being in particular. So Ron, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be with you. It really is.
Ron, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at the Upper Room?
Sure. So this is a relatively new program. In fact, February 1st, what made a year that the program has existed with the Upper Room. But it was a dream I had of reaching out to clergy and really connecting with their emotional and mental health. Part of my role over this last year has been to work with annual conferences, to meet with cabinets and bishops and clergy and laity, and to really talk about that intersection of faith and mental health, to suggest resources and skills, and to really just begin to make some impact into how we heal and how we stay well as we lead. And so that's really been the premise over this last year. And so we're excited about it. We're expanding. I think last year we were able to meet with 22 different annual conferences. This year we have a number of them already lined up. And so we're just really looking forward to getting in and engaging with the denomination to really focus on emotional and mental health.
And Ron, when we heard about at Wespath, when we heard about this role and what the Upper Room was doing, I was just so excited. Because we've been looking at clergy well-being for a little over 10 years now. And, you know, when I think about resilience and an Office of Resilience, and really trying to work and find ways to help clergy be resilient despite all that they're going through, I mean, what a fantastic offering. What brought you to this work? Like, what made this something that you were passionate about?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're exactly right. It's a ministry, right? It's in every time I'm able to go out or able to send stuff out, it's a ministry. That's exciting to me. What got me really connected in addition to being a United Methodist pastor and ordained elder, I'm also a PK. And so my father was a United Methodist pastor and ordained elder, and he pastored 40 years in the Prince Delaware Annual Conference. In fact, the year he retired, I was ordained, so we were on the same stage together. Right? He was my hero. He was my hero. And so when he passed, it left a tremendous place of grief for me. And part of me dealing with my own grief, going to counseling, getting therapy, working through that thing, really made me begin to question, well, how do other pastors and leaders do it when they grieve? Right? Where do we go to as pastors and leaders? Who do we connect to? And so that led me to go back to school and get certified in trauma and crisis intervention, to begin writing on this work and just studying and going around. And so that's what led to the creation of this institute with the Upper Room. Yeah.
That is fantastic. And of course, because of that expertise, both in trauma and grief, but also in being United Methodist clergy, growing up in a United Methodist clergy family, which is why we consider you such an expert on this subject. And I'm so grateful to have you here today. We shared with you our clergy well-being survey, our most recent clergy well-being survey, and we've been doing it for a little over 10 years. And you saw, just the decline in emotional well-being for clergy. I mean, we saw a decline in multiple dimensions of well-being, but emotional well-being in particular, particularly immediately after the pandemic, we saw a huge drop. We did not see significant improvement in 2023. So, all along, clergy have been struggling with their emotional well-being. It got a lot worse after the COVID pandemic with all of the racial and racial justice concerns, as well as the division in the church. I mean, it was absolutely a perfect storm, and it's not really getting better yet. So I'm curious, when you saw that, what did you think? How did that make you feel?
Well, to be honest, my first impression was just being heartbroken.
Yeah.
That's where we're at as clergy. It reminded me of that place, I believe it's in Haggai, where they come out of captivity. Children of Israel, they go back to the promised land. They find that all the buildings are destroyed, the houses are destroyed, the temple is destroyed, and they're just sad, right? Nothing is working. They're just sad. It reminded me of that place for them as our clergy. They're just sad. They're tired. They've worked hard. They've done their thing, and they're just tired. The survey really points to that when it talks about the ways in which I believe it was 62% of feelings of burnout or just tiredness or weariness, but it really speaks to this idea of fatigue and burnout. And you see that in our clergy. You see them just doing their best, but tired. And so that's really what this survey brought out for me.
And you've been visiting annual conferences. You mentioned, over 20 last year, more on the docket for this year. So you're talking with clergy on the ground in various settings. I mean, how does that resonate? What have you heard in terms of what are they saying about their emotional well-being and what's making things challenging for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's that tension. What I'm seeing by and large is this moment of challenge around identity. What does it mean to be a pastor today? What does it mean to be a United Methodist pastor today? What does it mean to be a tired, weary, emotionally, strained United Methodist pastor today? So I'm seeing this tension as I'm traveling around with folk really just trying to figure out who am I now in this system, in this moment. And you see those challenges resonating, whether it's, trying to do too much or trying to shift what we're doing or trying to find new vision going forward that speaks to the emotional well-being of each of us. But there's that tension happening in our annual conferences. Yeah.
Do you feel like it's different for clergy who have been who've been in their roles for a really long time versus younger clergy or even second career clergy who are first coming in? Like, are you seeing a difference? Is it impacting both of them differently, similarly?
Yeah, I think absolutely there's a difference. I think there's a difference between clergy who have been in the game for a while, licensed local clergy who are coming in as second career, younger clergy who are coming out of seminary, and then those entrepreneurial new church plant clergy who are looking at this. So you have all these different eyes looking at this moment in a very different manner. In fact, I was doing a presentation in one annual conference last year, and Kelly, you could have drawn a line down the room, right? It was that clear between those who were grieving over disaffiliation and those who were excited because of disaffiliation, right? So I just think depending on the culture of the annual conference, the culture of the state that they're in, you find all those kind of nuances are happening. Yeah.
What about demographic differences? I know that we don't have an evenly divided church when it comes to demographic differences, right? There are far more men than women, and there are far more white clergy than clergy of color. But there still are, strong representation of these other groups. And so do you see different experience when it comes to emotional well-being for, male versus female clergy, and then for white clergy versus clergy of color? And obviously clergy of color is not a monolith. So are you seeing differences there as well?
That's a really good question. I think one of the things I'm seeing as I think about the framing of that question is that I'm noticing in annual conferences where there are white clergy, their method of addressing their emotional mental health seems to be more isolated or personal. Right, in the sense that they've got a doctor, they've got a therapist, they've got their own workout schedule, gym, whatever. But what I'm noticing with clergy of color is that their method of engaging emotional and mental health seems to be in groups, right? So we're meeting together to do this collective workout. They're not an individual therapist, but we're calling each other and leaning on each other. And so there is a very different way in which, depending on culture, you're seeing that divided up. Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah.
It's a really interesting difference. And I'm wondering, I mean, I always wonder, there's no right way to deal with your emotional and mental health, right? Like the key is to do something, right? To do something, to notice it, to care, to build resilience, to not just kind of shove it all down. But are there opportunities for, different groups to learn from each other, right? Like, I mean, it's interesting to have conversations together or to share some of those individual practices. I just wonder.
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting the way you say that. When you think of, I did this piece maybe 2 years ago now, where I was looking at how traditional tribes handled emotional and mental breaks versus how Western medicine handled emotional and mental breaks. And one of the interesting things, and you just made me think about this, but one of the interesting things was with the traditional tribes, when someone had a mental break or something happened, their first step was to go before the elders, right? And then from the elders, it was to the community. And from the community, it was to go on this self journey of, just kind of reclamation, and then to come back and be represented, to the community. Whereas in Western culture, when someone were to experience an emotional or mental break, they would go to the counselor first, the therapist first. They would have some kind of steps, and as they're going through that process, some other person would be introduced, and finally, when they came to some kind of resolution, they would be presented to the group. And so there is this different way in which cultures address emotional and mental health. And I do think, to your point, it would be great. It'd be great to create something that really honored both of them together and allowed something new to get formed. Yeah.
And by no means do I mean to suggest that everybody has to, have the same journey or go about it the same way. But, I always think, when I'm going through my own mental health challenges and times of emotional low, I always wonder, is there somebody who's got this figured out better than I do? And what can I learn from them, who has it figured out? Let's go.
Yeah. I think we all think that same thing. Yeah.
What are you seeing in terms of the specific challenges or some examples of challenges that clergy are facing that might make it hard for them to either be emotionally well or dedicate time to becoming more emotionally well?
Yeah. Oh, okay, so I'm going to tell you the biggest problem we have right now. In terms of my estimation. COVID messed clergy up. It messed it up. Because here's what happened during COVID. During COVID, your pastor, I'm including myself, I, all of a sudden became an expert in graphic design, technology, camera work. You don't want me being an expert in those things. All of a sudden, right? Now, and all these pastors and leaders, they're functioning in that role. And what happened from post-COVID, in COVID, now we're having Zoom meetings. We're having all kinds of other platform meetings. And instead of the normal 9 to 5, we're going 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. We're just always accessible. We're always meeting. We're trying to plan and plot and figure out the next move and strategy and what's going to happen. And then here's the problem, Kelly. We go from COVID to post-COVID. So there's this move from doing to now strategizing. How do we get more folk involved? How do we make sure our churches are safe? How do we do X, Y, and Z? And then that moves to now that we're in this new place and nobody's coming or less people are coming. How do we? And so my whole point is there was never a pause. There was never a break. There was never, in most cases, there was never a thank you. There was never a, pastor, I think you deserve 2 weeks. I think you deserve a month. I think you deserve a week. It was just this constant from COVID, this constant train just going straight. And so as a result, your pastors, our pastors, myself, we are tired, just burnt out, right? Where others got the pause and shift and change, we just kept going. And so you add that tension on top of you just the use of social media, right? This kind of constant engagement, virtual engagement, whether again it's the Zooms or it's the cell phones or whatever, this constant engagement. I think those pieces make it really hard for pastors and leaders to manage their own emotional well-being. And then last one, I add this. No. Then you have this. Then you have this shift with many of our annual conferences cabinets who have moved to this, how we do charge conference reports, right? And paperwork, and how that has morphed and changed, and the stuff that many of these annual conferences are requiring from these pastors and leaders who are already tired, right? Already weary. It's just, so all of that, I think, has been a major contributing pattern for why you see a lot of pastors and leaders who are burnt out, as the survey reported, who aren't sleeping well, whose diabetes are up, whose, all those, measures are up. I think all of that is why you're seeing those pieces come into play. Yeah.
And one of the things, so you found some good ones, right, for the emotional and even the physical. When from the social well-being, we saw that pastors are feeling isolated at work, right? They don't feel like anyone understands them. And we know unequivocally that the different dimensions of well-being are interconnected. So if you've got, if you're suffering in one area, it will have an influence on some other.
It impacts the rest, yeah.
So if you feel like people don't understand you, or you're isolated and you're on an island, maybe because nobody's thanking you for the fact that you're, going. You just don't even feel seen. That impacts your emotional well-being, right?
Absolutely.
One of the things that we are talking about more after this most recent Clergy well-being survey is, kind of this dichotomy between personal accountability, because we all have choices that we make every day, right? And things that we do, either setting boundaries, certain disciplines, connecting with people to talk about, the things that are concerning us. So things that we do every day that, how we take accountability for our own. But then there's this other side, these aspects of serving in a church. We call them systems, right? But it's basically the environment that you live and work in as a United Methodist pastor. And you can't always control your environment. You like to think that clergy have great control over their environment because, they're the head of the church, but they just do not. They are being pulled from different directions, many different directions, whether it's, like you said, they're the Zoom boss, or the technology expert. We've also heard over the years, they're the CFO of the church and the janitor, and all of the things. And so, can you talk a little bit about what is the role that individual clergy have to play to take accountability for their own emotional well-being, and what do we need from the church, both the individual church and the lay folks in the pews, and the bigger church, cabinets and bishops? Like, what can you talk a little bit about what we need in both of those buckets?
Absolutely. So, and this may sound controversial. Let me just preface this by saying that. But one of the things that we teach in 12-step programs, right, is the importance of changing people, places, and things. Okay. Right? And so when we are talking about the emotional and mental health of clergy, one of the things absolutely that clergy need to begin to change are where we spend most of our time with people, our places we go to, and the things that we surround ourselves. You see, the problem is it's almost like learning a new language. I can teach you how to conjugate the verbs. I can show you all the nouns, and their genders and all that kind of thing. But until you immerse yourself in the culture, you don't really learn the language. And so we talk about mental health, we give all kinds of pieces, but until clergy immerse themselves in healthy places, there won't be a real change. And so the question around how much time are you spending, in nature or in the gym or, just enjoying family or, how long does your phone go off or does your laptop stay closed? How well are you taking care of yourself in practice? Will have an impact on your clergy mental health overall. So those are the kind of personal pieces I think clergy have to be able to do. To answer the other piece in terms of what do systems have to put in place in terms of accountability, well, it's how much load are we placing on these pastors? What are we highlighting in terms of what's important to us as the system? Is it important that our pastors are healthy and in shape? I mean, again, looking back at the survey, just the physical nature, the financial nature, right? The social are those things really important to churches, to the PPRCs, to the admin councils, right? To the district superintendents, right? To the bishops. Are those things really important? And if they are, how do we change what we're asking for in documents? How do we put money behind that, put resources behind that to actually make that come to pass?
So it's interesting to hear you say that, because I think absolutely your congregation does value the health and well-being of the clergy person. There's no way that a lay leader in a church who cares about their clergy person would say, no, we don't think that's important. But I think maybe they don't think about it. It's not one of those things that they're commonly, when they're in a church meeting and they're thinking about this is what the stuff we want the church to do, they're not thinking about, and how is this request impacting my clergy person, right? And when nobody raises their hand, I've seen this over and over, when nobody raises their hand, the only person who's left to kind of raise their hand is the clergy. And that's not right. In any other environment, in any other work environment, it doesn't work that way. Like, it's not like one person is working and has all the responsibility and then the volunteers have none. The volunteers, the lay leaders of the church, they have just as much ownership in the success of the mission of the church and everything that we do, the growth of the congregation. And so I think that maybe we don't realize how, we may not realize that our congregation may not have the capacity to do X, Y, and Z. And that doesn't mean that it's the clergy's responsibility to do, but it's the group's responsibility to kind of reassess what the priorities are.
Absolutely. And can I add in addendum onto that? Because you're 100% on. You're spot on. The piece I would add is when no one raises their hand, the clergy person raises their hand, right? And the expectation is not just on them, but on their spouse if they have one.
Right.
So there's this additional burden and pressure emotionally and mentally on clergy spouses, right? And you see that happen all the time. And so I think that's part of the other piece. How do we serve emotionally the household of the clergy? What's happening with their spouses? What's happening with their children? How do we make sure that's a healthy space for them as they're leading our church? Yeah.
Right. It's like the volunteer who doesn't get a choice, right? The 2-for-1 deal. And whereas years ago, decades ago, you had, often just one spouse in a household that was working. Now, in many families, including clergy families, you have two spouses working. So the non-clergy person in that relationship doesn't necessarily have any more time and capacity to spend and give to the church than anybody else in the pews, right? Like than any other congregation member. So to have that expectation is really quite unfair.
Absolutely. I've had to go into churches and say to some people, I am your pastor, my wife is not. Right? I've had to say that.
It's the boundary, right? It's setting the boundary.
Yeah.
It probably wasn't easy for you to do, right? Because you don't know what the perception is of you saying that is. And I think I wonder if a lot of times, find it challenging to set boundaries, whether it's for their spouse or their own time. I'm not available on this day. This is my Sabbath day, or this is my day off, or I can't do meetings after 7, or whatever it is. It's hard to know what the reaction is going to be, right?
It's true. It's true. It's true. It's true. I think what helped me was having been a PK.
Yes.
Right. So I know what it was. My father was the first Black district superintendent for the Eastern District of our annual conference. So he was always gone. Right. He was a chaplain for 2 different universities. Always gone. So I knew the consequence of that, of being in a house where, and so part of me just never wanted to repeat that in my own. So for me to call out, I'm the pastor, she's not, my kids are our kids, they're not the grandkids of whatever church we're in, right? For me to call that out comes out of an experience that we had growing up as PKs, and just knowing the result of that. Yeah.
Well, hopefully hearing you say this makes somebody listening to this today think, okay, you know what, that's a boundary I need to set. And maybe it feels like it's too late in this appointment. It's never too late, though, right? Always set a new boundary. But the next appointment, for sure, it's not too late to come in and, in a very fair and reasonable way, set some boundaries, really for your own mental health and well-being.
Absolutely.
Wespath had this saying that we used, a tagline that we used a while back that said, healthy you being clergy, healthy UMC. And the idea behind that is that the UMC itself cannot be healthy, that the ministry of the church cannot be healthy if all of its pastors are struggling. It's just not possible, right?
Yeah, impossible. And in fact, if you look now, and you think about the tension of where we're at in this moment, right? As we walk up to General Conference, there is this moment where it's this chicken and the egg kind of piece. Like which unhealthy system is impacting the other? Is it the unhealthy pastors who are impacting this, or is it the unhealthy systems impacting? Right, and so we are in that moment of just trying to figure out, where do you find healing at? Where do you find rest and resilience and wholeness? Right? Is the system giving you vision? Are the pastors giving you vision? And so we are in that kind of challenging space right now. Yeah.
So Ron, you've been out talking with annual conferences, talking with clergy. Have you seen anything that you would like to share with folks that says that you're like, wow, this worked. This was a success. When I saw somebody do this, or when I saw a congregation do this, or a pastor do this, I just wanted to cheer, because this really was something that others might try to emulate, and we could see some spreading of success.
Absolutely. Let me start with this question for you. When you were in elementary or middle school, or even high school perhaps, did you all have field day?
Field day, yes. As a mom, I volunteer at field day now. The kids still have it. It's fantastic, right? Get out and run around, play all the silly games.
Yes. I was in one annual conference a couple months ago, and at the end of the presentation, we're talking about the importance of body movement and how when you move your body, it releases endorphins when you stretch, right? How your blood begins to flow. The stimulation of that parasympathetic nerve, when you exhale deeply, right? Stretching, all that kind of stuff. And so to model this, we did the electric slide. And so we danced for the last half of the presentation.
Wow.
Right? When I tell you, Kelly, that made all the difference in the room. Everything changed. I think we need a United Methodist field day. I think post General Conference, we need to strategically plan in annual conferences, spaces and times for clergy and laity to come together and just have fun. Just run, dance, active, right? That whole play therapy, right? We need space for clergy just to come and let their hair down. So I think all this built up tension and post grief and present grief, and so I think that's a big part of it. And I say that very seriously. I think we need to do that. But also I think churches can do that. I think churches and communities can decide we're going to have play therapy. We're going to have a day of just yoga and stretching. We're going to have, a time of dancing. We're going to learn to two-step or do the cha-cha slide or, something, but something that gets us out of this rut and routine of just kind of consuming negativity, right? Those are until we begin to do these habits with our bodies and use our bodies in this way, we will continue to kind of just reproduce the same fruit that you're seeing now. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I would suggest and see in our annual conferences. Yeah.
I love that. And it can look different, right? Like not everybody has to have the same field day activities, right?
Yeah.
Like they can figure out what works with that culture and that locality and what's special to that area. And it ends up, we talked about the interconnectivity of the dimensions. You move a little bit, it's social benefit, right? Because you're smiling and looking at other people, and maybe feel closer to God in the meantime. And wow.
Yeah.
Win.
It's impossible to dance and not smile.
Right.
I dare anybody. If you're not smiling while you're dancing, you're not doing it right. You're right. You're right. I guess it is possible to do, but yes, 100%. Having those multi engagements, I think would make a tremendous difference in our denomination. Yeah.
So for all of those watching and listening, consider that a challenge. How can you do that locally at your church, within your district, broader at the annual conference? And I don't know if any general conference organizers are still are listening to this and want to see if we can have general conference field day, but that seems like it could be fun too.
I think it would be great. Yeah.
So what about leaders in the church, and what can leaders be doing aside from carving out time for these type of fun, engaging activities, which is absolutely innovative and exciting, and I hope we get to hear some stories about that happening. But what else do leaders need to do to help this trajectory?
Yeah. I think the biggest piece is making sure that we ourselves are regulated, and so doing those emotional check-ins. I have a piece that I call Spice. So asking, how is your spice? How are you spiritually? How are you physically? How are you intellectually? How are you connectionally? And how are you emotionally? Right? And so I think doing those kinds of check-ins with yourself before we go into meetings, even in the meetings with other leaders that we're participating with, and then after the meetings, I think is significant. Because if we're not checking in with ourselves and making sure that we're regulated, what we do in that dysregulation is that we change the atmosphere of the room that we're engaging in, and not everyone is toxic, right? Because those mirror neurons are working off each other, and so you have a feeling that something's wrong with me, and all of a sudden something's wrong with you, and it just passes down, and so we've created this environment of toxicity. So being able to stop that by doing check-ins as leaders, coming into a space and being able to acknowledge, I'm tired today, I'm weary today, I'm not in the best emotional space, physical space. Being able to acknowledge that openly then gives those that we're in leadership with the ability to do the same. So that's one thing. The other thing I'll say, so two things, that was one. The other thing I'll say is that we have this misnomer as leaders of shepherding. And I think that's caused a lot of dysfunction in the body of Christ, right? So this idea that we as leaders, as pastors, we are the shepherds and they are the sheep, right? We are the leader and they are the followers, right? That idea has caused a lot of harm in the church. The reality biblically is that there was never just one shepherd, right? Right? The shepherds were keeping watch over the sheep at night. You can't leave 99 sheep and go find the one unless you got some other shepherds watching the 99, right? And Jesus comes into ministry, and the first thing he does is find 12 disciples to work with him, right? So biblically, we have this different model of leadership than we've been doing as United Methodist pastors. We've been taking on all this responsibility on ourselves, which is why we have so much burnout, fatigue, stress, trauma, all those pieces, when biblically there's a different model that's being presented. And so I think as we think about new churches, we really need to be thinking about co-pastors or partner churches, or ways to operate collectively or together so that one individual isn't kind of assuming all of that pressure and weight. So I think those two things for leaders are going to be critical as we go forward. Yeah.
And then really inviting the lay leaders, right? If you don't have a co-pastor,
yeah,
the lay leaders have to step it up.
They have to.
We have responsibility if we want to see our churches succeed and if we want to see our mission grow. We have to be a shepherd too.
Absolutely, and we have to be empowered to live into that, right? And I think that's the issue, is that we've never articulated there were multiple shepherds, right? And so we have to be empowered.
Either, but of course there were.
Yeah, right. You can't have 100 sheep and one guy. Like, you got to have a bunch of people.
Maybe a few dogs.
Yeah, some dogs.
but
it's important to live into that authority. We are all called to be shepherds in this moment if we're going to really lead as God called us to. And he models that for us. Christ models that. Yeah.
Have to be willing to follow.
Yeah.
Well, I have found this to be very interesting, and I hope that those who have listened and spent some time with us today have learned some things about what their peers are facing. Maybe if we have lay folks who are watching, what their clergy might be facing. I hope that it's given some deeper perspective into kind of that conundrum of clergy emotional well-being and how it impacts all aspects of well-being. Ron, is there anything else that you would want folks to know about or think about when it comes to clergy emotional well-being that we haven't already talked about?
Absolutely. One of the things the survey highlighted, again, heartbreaking, was that 52% of our clergy had problems sleeping, right? And when you think about that, you think about what are the results of not being able to get good rest, right? Mentally, there's a fog. My body's not getting the oxygen it needs, so my system isn't regulating how it should, right? I'm operating out of fatigue, so I'm not my best self, right? There are all these kinds of negative things that happen when we don't get good rest. And the fact that over half of our clergy are expressing they're not resting is a serious problem. And so one of the things I would love to leave is just this idea, if not a prompt. What is your night regimen and your morning regimen? How are you preparing yourself for good rest, right? Are you turning all the electronics off 45 minutes before you go into bed? Are you turning the lights down, right? Are you taking a nice hot bath? Are you drinking some hot tea? Or, are you listening to music? Do you got some lavender? How are you preparing yourself to enter into good rest? Are you meditating? Are you breathing? Are you stretching? Are you doing yoga? When you're first getting up, are you doing all those same things to prepare your body for the day, right? How are you preparing to enter into rest? When we look biblically at God speaking, God often speaks to people in dreams, right? And so if we're not allowing ourselves to dream, it becomes hard to hear the voice of God in the midst of all this stuff. So we got to get rest. We got to get rest. And so part of this is important of how are we preparing ourselves to be in that space to get the rest we need to do the work that God has called us to. So that's one thing that I would definitely want to point out that we focus on good rest. Good rest.
And it's funny, I think often the reasons that people give for not doing those things, right, is that they don't have time, right? They don't have time to do da 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 da. Like they have to work right up until they go to sleep. They don't have time when they get up in the morning. But not investing that time really in yourself has consequences. And by just taking a little bit of time to make that a priority, it's kind of a small step if you think about it. It's something that's quite achievable with a little bit of self, like pushing yourself to do something that maybe you're a little bit out of control. But it's not like going to the gym and lifting heavy weights. It doesn't require like delving deep into your emotional psyche. Those are very doable steps.
Yeah.
Well, I like that ending. It's a very peaceful, restful ending. Ron, I thank you so much, certainly for your time today, but also for your ministry. I think that it's just fantastic to have somebody in your role with your experience, your passion, out talking with clergy. I'm excited for Wespath to continue to partner with you and with the
Absolutely.
coming years. So thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for the invitation.
Yep. And thanks to everybody for joining us today. If you haven't taken a look at the Clergy Well-Being Survey results, I hope that you do. And I hope that you will join us and be a part of this conversation about how we can change the trajectory of clergy emotional well-being and all dimensions in the community.